Bluff, Utah, is a small town in the middle of the desert, famous for its ancient cliffs and the ruins of the ancient Pueblo civilization. But more than that, this place is also surrounded by mysterious stories and creepy events that no one can explain. Travelers who have passed through Bluff at night have reported hearing whispers echoing from the cliffs, voices that do not belong to anyone. Some have tried to find the source of those sounds, but what they found only made them more scared. I never believed in ghost stories, but after a trip to Bluff, Utah, I completely changed my mind. What I experienced could not be explained by any logic. It was the middle of summer, and my two best friends, Jake and Melissa, decided to take a trip to explore small towns in the American West. Bluff was the last destination on our journey. It was a small town nestled against red cliffs, with dusty roads and ruins of the ancient Pueblo civilization. We arrived around 5 p.m. Bluff had a very strange atmosphere. The town was so quiet, as if no one lived here, although there were clearly small houses scattered along the roads. The streets were deserted, only the wind blowing through the dry cactus bushes. Jake laughed. "Hey, it looks like a ghost town. Tonight should be fun." We quickly found a small motel, which was pretty much the only one in town that was still open. The landlady, a woman in her 70s, gave us a strange look as we checked in. Before we left the front desk, she said something that made me shiver. "If you're going to be walking around town at night, stay away from the house at the end of Bluff View." She didn't elaborate. We just shrugged and laughed. After dinner at a small roadside restaurant, we decided to take a walk around town. As expected, the place was almost deserted. The streetlights were flickering, giving off a weak light in the thick darkness. None of us mentioned the innkeeper's instructions, but for some reason, we took Bluff View Road. It was a narrow dirt road, leading into a remote area on the edge of town. As we walked further in, an old, dilapidated house emerged from the darkness. The house looked abandoned for a long time, with broken windows and an old wooden door that swayed in the wind. There were no lights, no signs of life. But as we got closer, the door opens by itself. A cold wind blew past, making the hairs on the back of all three of us stand on end. I looked over at Jake and Melissa, both of whom were motionless. I whispered, "We shouldn't be here. Let's go." But Jake, the most reckless of the group, took a step forward and shouted, "Is anyone in there?" Absolute silence. Melissa tugged at my hand, her voice trembling. "Let's go home. I have a bad feeling." As soon as we turned around, I heard a small laugh from inside the house. Not a normal laugh, but a small, creepy sound, as if someone was deliberately trying to make us hear it. We ran. We returned to the motel in a state of complete panic. No one said anything about what we had heard. I tried to sleep, but images of that house kept coming back to me. At around 3 a.m., I heard a knock on the door. It was soft at first, like someone was just testing the waters. Knock, knock. I opened my eyes, feeling an invisible fear pressing down on my chest. I glanced at Jake and Melissa, both still fast asleep. I told myself I must be imagining things. But then, knock, knock, knock. Louder this time, more urgent. I took a deep breath, stealthily got out of bed, and walked towards the door. I looked through the peephole. No one was outside. But just as I was about to turn away, a gray hand pounded hard on the door, knocking me to the floor. I screamed, waking Jake and Melissa. All three of us watched as the door shook violently, as if someone was trying to break into the room. Then, everything stopped. There was no more noise. When the police arrived, they found no one. But when I looked down at the carpet in front of the door, there were black handprints. We left Bluff the next morning. When we checked out, the innkeeper just looked at us with a sad, sympathetic look. "You saw right?" I didn't answer. We got in the car and left town as quickly as possible. A few weeks later, I decided to find out about the history of that house. It turned out that in the 1900s, a family had lived there. A man was suspected of murdering his family, then committing suicide in that very house. No one dared to buy it, and the house sat abandoned for decades. Locals believed that his spirit was still around, wandering the dark rooms, looking for someone to replace him. I didn't know what he wanted from us. I didn't know what would have happened if I had opened the door that night. But one thing I am sure of, I will never return to Bluff, Utah again. If you ever find yourself in Bluff, Utah, remember, don't go near the house at the end of Bluffview Road. If you hear a knock at the door at 3 a.m., never answer. Bluff, Utah, a small town deep in the American West, is surrounded by majestic red cliffs and untouched forests. The landscape is breathtakingly beautiful, but to the locals, it hides a terrifying mystery, the Forbidden Forest. Legend has it that anyone who enters the forest at midnight will never return, and those who are lucky enough to escape will never be the same again. It is said that the forest is not only a part of nature, but also a gateway to something terrifying, a mysterious force that lurks in the darkness, waiting for those foolish enough to enter. One moonlit night, 3 friends, Ethan, Mark, and Lucy, decide to test the rumors. They are college students on vacation and want a mysterious story to tell later. With that in mind, they grabbed their flashlights and phones and began their trek into the forest at 11:45 p.m. As soon as they entered, something strange happened. The air was thick, eerily stuffy, and the forest was eerily silent. No insects, no wind blowing through the trees. Just deathly silence. Lucy, who was the most sensitive of the group, immediately sensed that something was wrong. She kept looking around, feeling like something was watching her. But when she said it, Ethan and Mark just laughed. They continued to walk deeper into the forest, the flashlights in their hands flickering with each step. Then a voice rang out, "Leave here now." The 3 of them froze. The voice didn't come from far away. It was right next to Lucy's ear. She screamed and dropped her flashlight. Ethan quickly bent down to pick it up, shining the light through the trees. And that was when they saw it. At the edge of the forest, looming behind a large tree, a tall, dark figure stood silently. It had no eyes, no nose, only a mouth that stretched from ear to ear. When the light touched it, the mouth curled up into a crooked smile. With their hearts pounding, the 3 of them turned and ran. Ethan felt his legs shaking so much that he almost fell. But what frightened them the most was not that the shadow was chasing them. It was that it appeared right in front of them, even though they had been running in the opposite direction. Mark screamed. Lucy collapsed exhausted. Ethan pulled her up and continued running, trying to escape the terror that was engulfing them. Finally, as dawn began to break, they escaped from the forest. But the fear had not left them. The 3 of them did not dare to tell what had happened. They returned to town with heavy hearts, but thought the nightmare was over. But a few days later, Ethan received a strange text message. It had no phone number. It contained only 3 words. "We're not done yet." Ethan shivered. He turned to the window, his heart stopping. In the darkness outside, a figure stood silently, watching him through the glass. And that mouth smiled again. There are places in this world that are not meant for humans. There are mysteries that are best left untouched. The 3 friends thought they were simply discovering a legend. But they were wrong. Because once you enter the Forbidden Forest, it will never let you go.